Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about the invisible forces that are, constantly shaping our daily interactions. From a simple handshake to a big team meeting, there are all these hidden rules guiding pretty much everything we do. I mean, really think about that for a second. We spend so much time and energy picking just the right words. But what if our bodies, the physical space around us, and just the vibe of the group we're in are all screaming something completely different? Okay, let's get into it. So first up, let's explore the powerful, unspoken messages we're constantly broadcasting with our bodies. And this goes way beyond just, good or bad posture. It's a whole secret language that honestly often says way more than our words ever could. And this gets to a really fundamental truth about how we connect with each other. We instinctively see body language as this honest, unfiltered broadcast of how someone really feels. In a way, it's like the original lie detector. So how does this language actually work? Well, it plays about 5 key roles. Sometimes it just repeats what we say, like when you point while giving directions. Other times, it totally contradicts our words, which is a huge red flag for dishonesty. It can substitute for words. I mean, a simple shrug says it all, right? It can complement a message, like a warm pat on the back when you say good job. Or it can really accent a point, like slamming your hand on a table for emphasis. Right, so when our brains get these mixed signals, we almost always default to trusting the body over the voice. That nonverbal message it cuts through all the noise because it feels more real, more authentic, and way less filtered. Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit from our own bodies to the actual space between us, because we all live inside these invisible bubbles of personal space, and the rules that govern them have this huge impact on how comfortable we feel and how we communicate. There's actually a science to this, and it's called proxemics. And it's not just about how close you stand to someone at a party. It's about how we design our homes, our offices, even our cities, and how all those spatial decisions are quietly shaping our social lives. And this part is absolutely crucial to remember. There is no single right amount of personal space. What feels totally normal and friendly in one culture can feel really intrusive, or maybe even cold and distant in another. That comfortable gap you leave between you and a coworker, that's not instinct. That's something you learned from your culture. This story from a contractor who was in Afghanistan is a perfect example. What one person saw as just a normal, friendly way to connect, the other person, Patrick, experienced as a really surprising invasion of his personal space. Now, his decision to just roll with it probably saved them from a really awkward misunderstanding. And it just shows you how important it is to be aware that these cultural rules are even a thing. All right, so we've talked about individuals and we've talked about pairs. But what happens when we zoom out even further to the super complex world of groups? Well, that's when the dynamics change in some pretty fascinating and honestly sometimes startling ways. The simplest change can have the biggest impact. A group of 2 people, what sociologists call a dyad, it's really intense, but it's also super fragile. If one person leaves, the group is just gone. But add just one more person, making it a triad, and everything shifts. The whole group becomes way more stable because that third person can step in and act as a mediator if the other 2 start to argue. That stability is also what makes a group such a powerful source of pressure. We're wired to want to conform, to fit in. But it begs the question, just how far can the influence of an authority figure push us when we're in a group? Well, a very famous experiment decided to find out. So back in the 1960s, the Milgram experiment tested how obedient people would be to authority. Participants were told by a guy in a lab coat to give electric shocks to another person for every wrong answer. The result was, it was shocking. A staggering 65% of people obeyed the authority figure all the way to the end, delivering what they thought was a final massive 450-volt shock. It's a pretty chilling look at the power of authority. Of course, most of the groups we're in aren't that extreme, but they can definitely still fall apart. And the problems usually come from these kinds of hidden factors. When leadership is weak or the goals aren't clear, you get chaos. When you have unspoken roles causing friction or people just aren't on the same page, you get conflict. These are the invisible tripwires that can make any team stumble. But the opposite is also true. This quote shows how powerful intentional leadership can be. Just setting clear expectations and respecting people's time can totally transform a group's dynamic. It builds trust, it builds focus, and it turns what could have been a waste of time into something really productive. And for the final piece of this puzzle, let's let's look at one of the most subtle things we do in our interactions, the way we constantly change how we speak and act to either fit in or to stand out. This whole idea is explained by something called communication accommodation theory. It sounds fancy, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's that in any conversation, our brains are making these tiny, subconscious calculations about social distance, and we adjust how we talk, our accent, our word choice, even how fast we speak to match. And we mostly do this in two main ways. We converge, which is when we shift our speech to be more like the other person. We do this when we want to fit in, get their approval. Or we can diverge, where we intentionally make the differences in our speech more obvious. We might do this to show we don't like someone, or maybe just to create some professional distance, like a doctor using very specific medical terms with a patient. So when you put it all together, you realize communication is never ever just about the words. It's this whole body, multi-channel performance. The tilt of a head, the distance between two chairs, the unspoken power dynamic in a room, that tiny shift in an accent. It's all part of this incredibly complex, unspoken dance we're doing with each other all day, every day. These rules are so powerful precisely because they're usually invisible. But now you see them. You can't really unsee these hidden layers of human connection. So that leaves a pretty interesting question, doesn't it? Knowing the rules of the game, how are you going to choose to play it?